Hello, friends, and welcome to Leadership Happy Hour. I'm Chip Lutz, the unconventional leader. And with me today, I am pretty excited. I've got Nora Burns, HR Undercover, the HR goddess, who at a recent conference petted me a little bit, which was nice. For me, having spent a little time in HR, although HR in the military is a little bit different than HR in the real world because we don't have to do some of the things other people do, but there are some things that cross over. It'll be interesting today for me to learn a bit more about what goes on, the inner workings of the HR world from somebody who sees it from a different perspective. So welcome, Nora, and cheers to you. Thanks for being on Leadership Happy Hour.
Cheers.
So if you could tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am Nora Burns, as you mentioned, and my business is HR Undercover. And what that means is it's a little crazy, and you're going to look at me like I'm a little bit nuts. So a couple of years ago, I realized that, I help organizations to do hiring practices and restructure their hiring protocols and strategies. I had not personally been on an interview in like a decade.
Wow.
I thought, well, that's kind of crazy. I need to do a 360 look at this hiring process and get a better idea of what's currently going on in the marketplace from the candidate's perspective. So I went on a handful of interviews initially, just down in Colorado Springs. I'm based here in Denver, Colorado. And after those couple 6 interviews, I was a little bit like, no, like, don't ask that, stop, no. And I was a little horrified by what was happening. So I committed to doing 100 interviews, not as myself, for positions from file clerk to director of operations across the country, because I didn't want anybody to say, oh, well, that's how you do it in Colorado, but we're so much better here in Wisconsin or in Texas or what have you.
Everything's better in Wisconsin.
I'm originally from Wisconsin, so I can commiserate on that. And so I started out going out on over 100 job interviews, and now I speak on what's really happening in the hiring process when they don't know that our hiring expert is looking. But wait, there's more. They wasn't masochistic enough for me. So keep up a professional speaker. 1 sip of champagne. See, this is going to be a long hour. I have, during my keynote address, afterwards, people would say, but did you take any of the jobs?
That was going to be my question. Did you get offered a job?
As the undercover candidate, first of all, I was offered more jobs than I should have been. Many more jobs than I'm qualified for, which is a little scary. And I hadn't taken any of the jobs because I applied for all of them under pseudonyms. I created 5 different characters, and I did not apply for them under the name Nora Burns. So I'm friends with John Cilio, who speaks on identity theft. So no, I draw the line at a felony for doing HR research.
I have to ask, was one of your names like one of your bar names? Because I have a bar name, like Rusty Summer is one of my bar names. So did you have one of your bar names that you used as your pseudonym?
No, but I did use my Uber name. I have a name that I use on any app like Uber that I don't have to use my real name on. So I did use one of those names, but I didn't use my real name. So, and actually, it was really funny on 2 of the interviews early on, before I figured out that I really needed to do characters and tap into every drama class I've ever taken in high school and college.
Yeah.
Before that happened, during my first 10 interviews, I twice introduced myself as Nora to somebody interviewing me for a job under a different name.
And scene.
And so you would have thought, this is the crazy part. Neither time did the interviewer hesitate a moment. It was just a passing glance. And on one of them, I was offered both jobs. I introduced myself to the person interviewing me by a name that was different than the name on the resume. And not even close. Like, my best friend's like, well, why didn't you have like Nora be your middle name, or use the name Eleanor so you could, like, oh yeah. I'd say I was the smartest person in the room.
That's funny. That would be a good, that way it would be a good pass off. So no, it's My family calls me Eleanor, my Nora, because my middle name's Eleanor. That would make sense.
That would have made.
What's your craziest fake name that you use?
I don't disclose my fake names.
Oh, darn it!
Although, if you ever are my Uber driver, you'll know what one of them is. I gave that away.
That won't happen. But you come to Wisconsin, I'll pick you up, at the airport. But you don't have to contact me from Uber, because I would pick like some fun names just to make it more fun for me. I like a little wordplay. So
yeah, that would. No, I wasn't. I did have to play with the. So under the initial process, there were some areas that I went to interview with that I played with the names a little bit, because I realized I wasn't getting interviews under a certain name, and I started doing some of that A/B testing. Like, what if I sent almost duplicate resumes under different names, a male name, a female name, knowing that I can't interview as the man. And it was interesting. I didn't do a full study on it, but I did have enough where I noticed a trend,
Trend that you would get more calls back with the male name?
Male name than with the female name. Yeah, on some jobs in some areas. Again, I didn't do enough to do a full, come to any solid statistical conclusion and type of a thing, but it was interesting. But yeah. So during these talks on undercover candidate, people would say, "Did you take the job?" And I'm like, "Well, no, because of this whole felony thing." But then I thought, well, what if I applied under my real name? And so the challenge I had was, as much as I tell my clients, do not Google job candidates. I know people do, but don't do that. Don't Google your job candidates' names. So I went in and did some reverse SEO work, because it had been that Nora Burns would bring up the first 3 pages were me, and I didn't want that. There's a comedian in New York. There's a folk singer somewhere in Tennessee or something. So I have enough, even though there's only 72 people named Nora Burns in the country.
Really?
Yeah. There's a website called How Many of Me, howmanyofme.com or howmanyofme.org, something like that. And you can put in your first name and your last name, and it'll tell you how many people in the United States have your exact name.
That's funny, because I know that there's a golfer named Chip Lutz, and it took me forever to knock him off the first page of Google. But then there's a few other Chip Lutzes on Facebook, and one of the Chip Lutzes I friended, and he lives in Denver. So I made friends. I made friends with the other Chip Lutz, and I was flying into Denver, and I pulled up Facebook, and there was a little message from another Chip Lutz said that, "Hey, my chip senses are tingling. You must be coming to Denver." I'm like, "I am coming to Denver. How'd you know?" And he's like, "Well, the company that I do all my AV work for, is doing the AV work for the hotel you're speaking at." So I got, it was crazy. And they said, "Oh, our keynote speaker's Chip Lutz." And like, "Oh, we have a Chip Lutz." And so I met the other Chip Lutz, and
fantastic.
We both graduated in 1986. We both joined the Navy right after graduation. He went to the East Coast, I went to the West Coast, and it was weird to meet the other Chip Lutz.
That's awesome. This is how wormholes are created, right? Right there was a
exactly. Cheers to that. Here's to the wormhole. Here's to the wormhole. So that's pretty interesting. 100 different interviews you went on, under different names, and I'm sure. It had to have been like super eye opening for you on what's going on. What are some of the big ones? We'll get into the smaller ones in a minute, but like some of the biggest things that you were just like, bam, that is crazy.
Bam, that is crazy. One of the most often asked questions of me, now granted, it's me, and the demographics that come along with that, one of the most often asked questions was, "Do you have kids?"
Really?
Stop asking that question. It falls solidly into the category of none of your damn business. It's none of your business. And sometimes I got it as you could tell it was a rapport building question. They were trying to just find some commonality and like, we talk about, as we waited for another interviewer to come in the room and those types of things. But that's still part of the hiring process and still part of the interviewing process and still subject to the same rules, guidelines, regulations of the whole bit. The other is sometimes it was asked and you could just tell that they were fishing for how many days off was I going to need a year. And after I did about 50 interviews and noticed this trend, then I decided that I could start messing with people. And then
So what do you mean? How would they ask the question to find out how many days off that you would need a year? Like, you know.
Well, but because if I'm asking you how many kids do you have,
there
was some of that, like, one of the undertones, one of the things people are trying to find out is like, what are the multitude of reasons you're going to call in sick or call off or whatever?
I wonder, you think there's an algorithm they have, like, you know, X times the number of kids divided by pi equals the amount of time people you normally ask off? There's like a certain algorithm for that. So if you've got 6 kids, they plug it into the algorithm and they're just like, well, you know, shit, she's going to be gone like half the year.
That would have required so much more preparation than most people were prepared for interviews. No, although I do think there is a gender bias that happened, because I'm fairly certain you would not have been asked that question at the same level and propensity the number of times that I was asked it. But after a bunch of interviews, I started messing with people, like 7. Yeah. Seems one of them is always sick. But no, so the asking about kids definitely has a gender bias, and it has no business in an interview. And I was quite frankly shocked that now that we're, you know, into the 2000s, that question is being asked at all.
Right.
Like, I wasn't as surprised when I was first out of college and people were asking it, but we're a few years past that now.
Yeah. See, I would mess them completely different. I would be like, you know, well, I do have 6 kids, but they all got taken away by Child Protective Services. After my last arrest, you know, I was, you know, selling meth, and, you know, I would do it completely different than you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if I'm going to mess with somebody, I'm going to go deep. I'm going deep undercover. I'm doing deep undercover. That's what I'm doing.
That's fantastic.
So that's interesting, you know, because I would think as well that in today's day and age that we would be kind of past some of the I don't want to say gender related questions, you know, and if they asked, you know, me that, I probably wouldn't even think about it, I guess, you know, because like, okay, I've got 4 kids, you know, they're all grown. I like them once in a while, you know, I would just leave it like that. So that's interesting.
Yeah, and it just falls so solidly in the none of your business kind of category. So it's like, it's not job related. The only thing it can do is put a bias into your interviewing process.
Right.
And impact not hiring a fantastic candidate because you're judging them on one side or the other.
Yeah, true. So that's a big one. What are some other big ones that, you know, came up? You're just like, what?
I'm surprised at how often people still ask what do you do for fun? And because again, it's just not related to the business at hand, and it forms a bias. Because it's like, what if I say, well, you know, I'm really active in the gay, lesbian, transgender alliance, right? Now you've got a whole bunch of information. What if I say I'm really active in the X political party, right? Mm-hmm. You got all kinds of other information.
Right.
Or if I go skydiving and bungee jumping, you're thinking, oh, my insurance rates are going to go through the roof, right? So there's all of those types of things. The other thing on the candidate side, I was just really surprised by was the lack of understanding of employment brand and how much your employment brand impacts and influences your overall marketing brand. Because what I do during that job interview and when I'm having contact with that job candidate, that person's going to go out and tell a dozen people who are going to tell a dozen people who are going to tell a dozen people in the same way that when I have a great customer or a bad customer service experience, it kind of spreads on.
Right.
And so not kind of that connectivity between employment brand and your overall marketing brand. But also just the synergy between are we who we say we are, right?
Yeah.
My moments where it took every ounce of impulse control to not just burst out laughing was the number of times people would say, we're a really team-oriented organization. We're very team-oriented. We're very team-oriented. Did I mention we're team-oriented? As I'm interviewing one-on-one with somebody for the second or third process. They're like, we're really team-oriented, but heck, we're not going to involve anybody else in this hiring process. That's all me.
That's all me. They don't trust anybody else with that. They don't trust the rest of the team.
Exactly. But we're really team-oriented.
They're all a bunch of morons.
Just not in hiring.
They'll be like, so what do you do for fun, Nora?
Yeah.
Hang out with your kids?
Exactly. Yeah. I know. Things you can talk about at happy hour and things you can talk to a job candidate are vastly different.
Exactly. On happy hour, you're not confined by the rules that govern HR. I mean, sometimes within the workplace, we live within kind of our own little bubble. We don't really think about, impact on other people, the questions we ask. We're just kind of, in our own little world, and we need to act, like you're kind of alluding to is, think about things before you ask them. So very interesting on the, those two questions, because I would ask somebody, just if I was, say if I was waiting for somebody to come in to, help with the interview, if it was actually a team interview, making small talk, I might ask, hey, so what do you like to do? What if I wouldn't even think about looking at it like that, as far as being like, hey, none of your damn business.
None of your damn business.
That's what I do.
None of your damn business.
Yeah, that's the answer. I mind my own business. That's what I do. How about you?
I mind my own business. Do you? No. No, and it's interesting because it's this interesting turn of events, because once somebody's on board and they are your employee, I absolutely want managers and supervisors and leaders in the organization to know that they have kids or they don't have kids, or they're married or they're not, or they fly fish, or they like to, be active in their politics or what have you. But there's this huge difference between the person who's not yet in your organization and the person who's working on your team already. And that's part of that change, that transition.
All right. So we got two big questions there. I know that you probably must have like a whole list of questions not to ask, but I like hearing the ones that are just like the biggest no-nos.
Well, and what I think is, and I'd love to do a breakout that's just called this, a breakout session. If somebody is ballsy enough to do this breakout session at their conference, I would love it. And that's, you're not freaking Freud, right? Like, stop pretending that you're Freud during your job interviews. Mm-hmm. Because people are like, what's the most recent book you've read? And you're like, here's the challenge, right? So my HR challenge is, what if I say, what to expect when you're expecting? Right? Or what if I say the Quran?
What was the last one?
The Quran, or some biblical text, right? What if I say, how to build explosives in 7 easy steps?
That's what I was just going to say. How to build a pipe bomb in 7 even steps.
There is so much that can go wrong with this question. Mm-hmm. And then when I ask hiring managers, why are you asking that question? It's, well, I want to assess if they're really a continuous learner or if they're really staying in this. Okay, well then say, so, to tell me about a book that you've read on leadership most recently, or an article that you've read on leadership in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, mm-hmm. or in Forbes magazine. Tell me about something you've recently read in the area of leadership and what your take is on it. Right now, I know if you're staying up on, if you're citing an article that was written in 1999, it tells me you're maybe not reading most recently about what's going on in the leadership realm.
Right.
So changing the question essentially. Okay.
So not that it's like so what you're saying is that on that question there, the way you phrase it or the way you approach it is completely different. That it's a decent question, just you have to approach it a little bit differently. Opposed to the other two questions where, you should just stay away from those. Yes,
get rid of those. Get rid of those. Yeah, there's questions you can take and tweak, and we do this a lot during like my workshops, or we're working with people's actual questions, and I'll have managers write down, tell me your favorite question, because most of us who interview a lot have a go-to question, right? A question
right.
Ask regardless of what the position is, regardless of what the job description is. It's our own little space that we want to evaluate. Challenges to make that you're not freaking Freud, right? Like I had one hiring manager that I worked with in a big utility company who said his go-to question was, do you play video games? Okay, so here's the thing. As a job candidate, what I hear is you play video games, like a lot, and I'm going to have to cover for you because you're going to be playing video games. And I said, why are you asking that question? And he said, well, because we're project managers and you have to manage all of these different moving parts. And if you can play like World of Warcraft and you can manage the gear and he listed like 7 things you have to manage.
Yeah.
You have to manage, there's quests, you have to manage all of that. And if you can keep track of all of that, then you can do this job. And if you don't, then you can't. And I said, well, you've just ruled out one of my closest friends who doesn't play video games,
right,
reads a ton, and has degrees from Georgetown and Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
If you would say no, because she's going to say no, and look at you like you're a wackadoodle.
I guess my go-to question might be, if a chicken and a half laid an egg and a half in a day and a half, how many 3-cent stamps are in a dozen?
7.
12. There's always 12 in a dozen. And
7 is my answer to any mathematical question.
The answer is 7.
I stopped listening after a half and a half and a half.
But that's something my dad would always say. But anyway, mainly probably because, I like to know if people that I'm working with have a sense of humor, or if they like to have it, if they get a joke. And I might, so I don't know what my go-to question would be on that, to see if they have a sense of humor, or if I would just pick that up during an interview.
Well, but the question is, how important is a sense of humor? Is it really an essential job requirement? Because P.S., you've just ruled out people who are on the spectrum, who might not get humor in the same way, but are wicked smart.
Okay. I like to have fun. Cheers.
Cheers.
I like smart people, but I like people, actually, truthfully, if brains over unbridled enthusiasm, I would rather have unbridled enthusiasm over brains any day of the week, on somebody on my team. Having led a lot of different teams, my time in the Navy, I like smart people, and that's great, but when we have stuff to do, I want unbridled enthusiasm. And I don't, if we got to rework it later, we'll rework it later, but let's just hit this and let's hit it hard. And let's just, have a lot of fun while we're doing it.
And get it in.
I understand where you're coming from on, not discounting anybody that's, wicked smart, but because I'm not the smartest. Like you said, I'm not the sharpest tool. I'm not I fundamentally admit that I am not the sharpest tool in the shed. And I always need to surround myself with people that are smarter and see things and think of things I don't think about. I mean, when I build my teams, that's how I build my teams. Like I look at, what are my shortcomings and what do I need to fill those gaps? So,
oh, no, absolutely. Yeah. You've got to find the people who look at the world differently.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because that's where so many of our biases in hiring actually end up with people just hiring mini-me's.
Oh, yeah.
I remember being hired into one of my previous roles when I was still in a corporate position, and I had been there maybe a month, and I just realized every idea I come up with, my boss is going to think is brilliant because we are sharing a brain. I am simply 15, 20 years her junior, but other than that, we are both incredibly right-brained, thinkers, conceptual, social, some analytical kind of thinkers, and unbridled enthusiasm, right? So we have so much in common that, I'm like, oh, we already have this brain.
You're like, let's do this. Yeah, let's do that. That's a great idea. I know it's a great idea. Yeah. We're so brilliant.
Back into a mirror.
We are so brilliant.
Yeah, we are so brilliant. And nobody will challenge any of our ideas because it's just us.
It's just us. And we rule the world. Well, you like people on your team that get you as well. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But I always like the naysayers. They might get underneath my skin a little bit, but if they keep me out of jail and keep me on the right track, seriously.
It's good to have goals, my friend.
Yeah, you don't want to have people like, you don't want me anywhere around like, checkbooks. So like I had one of my jobs, I had, an accountant, but then I was able to get somebody else that was even smarter just so they could keep track of every penny we spent, because we had a multi-million-dollar budget. And, I would just be like, I want to buy this. And it's like, well, sir, we don't have the money for that. Oh, okay. Because I'd be like, I want this. Let's do this. This is a cool toy. So when you're out and about and, you're talking, I assume that you do most of your work with the HR world, or I would think that any leader would need to hear what you have to say on just how to hire, things. I mean, obviously in the world of HR, they've got a specific interest in, what you do, but I would think that any company, any organization would want to know what you have to say, having gone through so many stuff. Because, like you said, we're all we're a little bit biased. We have our go-to questions. Nobody preps us on how to interview people. I mean, it's usually you draw the short straw. Okay, well, we have to hire somebody. You got the job, and you're just like, so what's the first thing somebody does? They Google interview questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your greatest strength and your greatest weakness? Could we stop asking that question, please?
What's a better question?
Well, here's the thing. It depends on what you're looking for. If you are nervous about interviewing, like you haven't interviewed, you just drew the short straw, somebody just said, you've got to go do this interview, and you literally have no time to prep, or you're really nervous about interviewing, because it can be a little bit nerve-wracking on either side of the table. Mm-hmm. If you're really nervous and it's a nice, easy lob for you to start so that you can kind of get your own kind of composure, and it allows your candidate to answer a question that they have prepped for. There is not a single how to prepare for interviewing book or podcast or blog that doesn't reference be ready for what's your greatest strength and what's your greatest weakness. So my
answer would be like, well, they're both the same thing. I tend to care too much and work too hard.
Exactly. Nobody's like, well, it turns out I'm just really kind of a hard person to work with.
Yeah, my greatest weakness is I have really terrible anger issues. That's why I left my last job. I just couldn't get along with anybody. I ended up hitting somebody in the face. It was terrible.
I don't execute on any of my performance goals.
That's even better. What's your greatest weakness? Well, I'm really just inherently lazy. I just
I hate people.
They used to call me the Grinch at my last job.
Exactly.
Oh, that's funny.
So it's a throwaway question. It's a crap question. And right. I give hiring managers a hard time, and I speak pretty candidly, and I say, you know what, if that's your best interviewing question, your greatest weakness is hiring. It's just a throwaway. Nobody comes in and is telling you the truth in that question, right? No. So it's just a throwaway question. So it's just, it's a crap question. So if we could do away with that one, I'd be so happy.
So what are some awesome questions, or these are the ones you should ask? Do you have a top 10 list?
Well, it depends on what you're hiring for.
Okay.
Right? What is it that you're hiring for, and kind of base it on the competencies for the job. Because if you don't know what you're really looking for, you're going to have a hard time finding it.
Right.
In any goal that you set, and the same is true in hiring. Mm-hmm. Right. If I don't know what I'm aiming for, I'm definitely not going to get that. And the challenge is that we ask the same interview questions regardless of the position, instead of gearing it towards the position. The other big mistake that we make is we ask the questions based on the resume. And I don't know about you, everything on my resume, including all of my fake resumes, of which there are many, and there's nothing on there I don't want you to ask me about, right? What you should be digging for is the stuff that's between the lines.
Okay.
Right? What haven't you disclosed to me? And what is relevant there to the competencies? So there's that. And I ask, depending if they're working with teams, I do ask questions about teams. What I worry about is, and this happened with me as the Undercover candidate, is people ask 2, 3, or 4 questions about dealing with conflict at work during one interview.
That's to me. That's like a red siren. You know, where there's issues there in the workplace.
Every day, there's an issue here every day, right? Like, get out. So being somewhat aware of the meta messages you're sending to your job candidates, based, like, how do you deal with an angry customer that does this? How do you deal with an angry customer that does that? You keep asking about the angry customers. All I can think of is everybody hates you. Right? Like, no happy customers.
Right.
About it.
So what I hear you saying then is like the big thing is almost like to figure out your objective on what you're looking for, whether not just position, but the qualities of the person that you're looking for, and then tailor your questions that gear towards that. Like if you're looking for somebody that's a team player that has integrity or a good sense of humor, whatever, that it's almost like when you develop curriculum, you start with your learning objective, and then the objective drives the curriculum, which drives the test, which tests the objective. So it's almost the same type of thing. It's like you start with your objective, drives your questions, and then you can however answers those, that's kind of the test on going back to the person that you're looking for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's a great tool, and I don't sell it. You don't have to be a consultant in HR to buy it, called Lominger, Lominger, the Lominger competencies. And they've got a deck of competencies, and they're all spelled out, and that way you don't have to write your own definitions.
Really?
And essentially say, like, humor at work, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the competencies is humor at work. And it'll say, this is what it looks like when that's happening well. This is what it looks like when it's underdeveloped. Mm-hmm. And then this is what it looks like when it's overused. Because something that's really, really awesome at this amount is really, really horrible when overused, right? Like humor at work. There's an appropriate amount of humor at work, and there's an inappropriate, uncomfortable, random, awkward humor at work, right? So Lominger competencies is a great way to start.
Interesting. I'd never heard of that.
Yeah, and you can sort the deck based on what's most important. Now, I challenge managers to do this when they're hiring with their team, right, to figure out what's highest, and force rank so you get to the top 4 or 5. Because oftentimes the temptation is, here's the 25 competencies, and you cannot measure performance against 25 competencies. You can't hire to 25 competencies. What are the things that are absolutely critical and that we can't teach, right? It's the difference between the person who has unbridled enthusiasm and in-depth knowledge already about how this industry works.
Right.
Which one is most important for you in your organization?
Right.
It might depend on if you're a startup or if you're a Fortune 100 company and what you need to bring into that team. But yeah, and then basic questions around those.
Do you in your work ever work with companies that use, personality assessments to automatically disqualify people?
I'm going to need a drink.
Cheers. Okay. Well, because I had a grad student when I was teaching grad classes that she worked for a company, and it was a conglomerate, like I want to say it was the Taco Bell, KFC, Pizza Hut group.
Yum.
And they had a certain test that they gave people to and if they didn't hit certain wickets, they wouldn't even they were automatically out of the running for a call, look at the resume, anything. It was. I
like that rep. If you don't hit certain wickets, I suddenly just had a flash to croquet. So yes, there's a lot of companies that are using personality assessments to rule out candidates. Mm-hmm. The Department of Labor has a very specific viewpoint on that.
Do they?
So I'm not an attorney, nor do I play one on TV. I just
stated a Holiday Inn Express.
I have a lot of years, but I do know enough to state a Holiday Inn Express. But I do have 20 plus years behind me in HR and working in a vast variety of capacity. And I've read a lot of judgments, court cases that have to do with HR. And here's the thing. As a general rule, psychometric tools like DISC, Myers-Briggs, and the lot are not something that you can use to disqualify a candidate.
Oh.
Because they are not predictors of behavior. They are descriptors descriptors and not predictors, right? So just because somebody on a disc is a DI, it doesn't mean that they can't do a job that requires a high amount of detail orientation. It will draw down their energy to do that. It will be more exhausting for them in the long run. That's going to impact work-life balance, that type of thing. But it doesn't mean that they won't be skilled at it.
Okay.
With our speaker friends, right? So in the National Speakers Association, there are extroverts and there are introverts, and there are those, what are they calling now, the omniverts or something, the third in the middle. So truly the US population is divided into thirds, a third really extrovert, a third really introvert, a third, it depends on the situation. So across NSA, a profession that makes their living speaking in front of audiences, there's still a mix of extroverts and introverts. They are all equally skilled at their job. They're all equally able to have, well, you know, there's CPAEs and there's all of that, but they're all able to do their training or their keynoting, their workshops, etc. The difference is how much energy do you have at the end of the day?
Right.
How are you going to regroup that energy? Are you going to get it by, you know, drinking alone? Are you going to get it by going out and being with other people? Yeah, drinking with other people. No, that's the difference. I can't say you're an introvert, you'll make a horrible public speaker. It's not a true statement. And so you can't have somebody do a Myers-Briggs or a DISC or something like that and then rule them out. Have them do it and have a discussion around it. Yeah. The difference is there are ethics. You can do ethics and values inventories as long as they've been validated. But I actually had somebody in the Undercover candidate project. I actually had a company, not a big company, a mid-size to small company, that had me go onto, I think it was Tony Robbins' website. I think he's got a DISC breakdown kind of there, like here's your DISC report. Do the free assessment and then forward the free assessment to them. No.
We want the results, but we're way too cheap to pay for them.
Exactly. We want to use this assessment. We're really not supposed to be using during a hiring process. We're going to find a workaround. Yeah.
That's funny.
You got to give them a couple of points for, you know, being, you know, clever. Like they found a workaround. Yeah.
So after you're done with the fake interviews, did you ever send a letter to the people saying like, hey, this wasn't real, I appreciate you participating, you know, in this, or did you just keep it on the DL?
No, and I was really torn. The first time I was offered a job, I didn't sleep for a week. Like I was so pensive and so like, oh my gosh, please tell me you did not rule out all of your other candidates. And I do a lot to communicate that. Like throughout my research, I would say, oh, I'm talking to many companies. I'm talking to 3 different companies. I've got an offer from another one, to make sure that I'm sending the message that you're not the only, you know, the only game in town.
I was just curious if you were like an episode of Punk'd. You just got punked.
No, if I had encountered an interview where I was like, bam, they knocked it out of the park. Like, fantastic. I can hold them up on a, you know, like perfect example. I probably would have done a follow-up and said, can I cite you by name in the book? Right. But I didn't have that. I came close a couple times, but I didn't have any experience where I was just thought, wow, this is the case study on the perfect interview. So now what I have done is I did a keynote address for the Colorado Hotel and Lodging Association. And often when I do the keynote, if I'm booked far enough in advance, I ask the meeting planner to send me a list of registered attendee organizations as they're coming in. So like when registration first opened, you'll have the early birds. And I said, after 3 days of registration being open, can you send me the list of employers that are represented at your conference? And then they keep me kind of in the loop throughout. She said, of course. So what I do, assuming that they've booked me far enough in advance, is I then either go interview or I have somebody on my team go and interview at several of those organizations.
So sneaky.
So that, well, no, really, I call it customized. So I will have real examples from their industry. And my whole goal in this is not to blame or to shame, right? So I don't name names.
Uh-huh.
When I did this for the Colorado Hotel and Lodging Association, and they sent me the list, I gone out and I did some interviews with some of the properties that would be present. And for one of them, I had only interviewed 2 weeks before the conference at their property.
Uh-huh.
And at the beginning of the keynote, I said, like this, as I was introducing what I do and how I do it, I said, now it's worth noting that I have interviewed with 4 organizations who are represented in this room right now, like 4 properties, specific properties, not just a brand name, but that property that was registered. I said, and I recognize 2 people who are in this room as the people who interviewed me. Now, it's worth noting, I wasn't wearing the purple glasses. The purple glasses stand out a little bit too much.
Right.
So, and I didn't have my hair striped. So, but I said, if you are one of those organizations, first of all, don't worry. I'm not naming names. I'm not giving examples and citing your property.
Jane Smith.
And, but it rhymes with, no. I said, but what I will offer you is something I don't normally offer. And that's if you recognize me from that interview and you come up and talk to me afterwards, or you send me an email or a text or give me a call in the next month. So I opened it and I said, if you don't want to talk to me at this convention, I totally get it. People are going to be like, ooh, is that you? But you can call me for up to a month. And on the one where I'd interviewed just 2 weeks before, I went up to the table purposefully, and it's these big dining tables. And I went up and I said, so, what are you looking to get out of, as everybody was funneling in, making a little chit chat. I said, is there anything in particular that's really standing out to you about this project? And they were like, oh, and they brought up a couple things. The person, there was no connectivity. They could not have Nora Burns, the keynote speaker, and the housekeeping candidate could not, there was just not they couldn't, 2 out of context.
Does not compute. Does not compute.
Yeah, and it was just one of those, but it also talks a little bit about the dehumanization of that process, right? Because you're just one of many kind of chugging through,
right? And
lost opportunities for building brand,
right?
Versus if I had done the keynote and then I'd gone on the interview, then they would have been like, whoa, wait, what? Kind of a thing. So
your work is absolutely fascinating to me. It is that, you are gutsy enough and had enough moxie to go out and do all these because it does. That takes a lot of moxie to go out and, try to be somebody else and, take all the information and, then provide value to other people with that information. Just absolutely fascinating. I need to, start wrapping up, but I want to, if you had to coming down and wrapping up to your 3 big tips for, HR leaders or leaders in general out there, as far as the whole hiring practice, what would be your top 3 things you would, piece of advice?
Top 3 things on the hiring part of it. 1 is to take a closer look. I know you're not going to probably, we do mystery shops of hiring processes for organization now as part of our business, but that's a big dollar ask, and you have to be really committed to making changes in your process to do that.
Right.
But it doesn't keep a leader in your organization from really thinking about and debriefing how that hiring process looks. How does it look from the moment we send them information about our organization to how we greet them when they come in? When we say it's a 10 o'clock interview, is it really a 10 o'clock interview? Or do we value our time more than yours and it's a 10:20 interview? If you're sending those messages throughout your entire process to your candidate about what you really like.
Okay.
One is to really take a close look at it. And the second big one related to that is to stop saying things like, well, that's just how it is in our industry. Because that's just an excuse, right? To say, oh, well, that's just how it is in retail. That's just how it is in healthcare. That's just how it is. There's so many opportunities to improve processes by looking across industries to really get some insight into what you could be doing differently. So that's probably the second big one. And the third big one is to remember that hiring process and that welcoming your new employee doesn't stop with the offer. It doesn't stop with new hire orientation. We didn't even talk about the second part of this crazy project, where I actually worked for 15 months in 5 different Fortune 500 companies on the front line.
We'll have to schedule more time. We'll have to do it like a part 2.
But wait, there's more.
There's more.
But it carries through. That relationship building starts from your very first point of contact.
Right.
The ad, the job posting, the recruit, LinkedIn connection, all the way through. And to remember that it's a relationship.
Well, I would love to spend more time with you. We will schedule that and do a part 2. Now, if we were at a real bar, having a real happy hour, of course I would challenge you to do something crazy because, well, that's just the sailor in me. However, because we're not, I'm going to have to ask you a few random questions for my overstuffed would you rather book. So, yeah, take a drink, take a swig.
I'm going to need more alcohol. No.
All right.
Okay.
Let's see.
Ready.
Nora Burns, would you rather have to plug yourself in every few hours to recharge before you shut down as you would your laptop, or only be able to travel by means of rickshaw?
I'm going to go with plug in because we should take breaks anyhow.
Nice.
Right?
Nice.
We need
that couple that in there. All right.
Right. Scott Helford's book on Activate Your Brain. We need some white space in our lives to learn.
Next question. Would you rather, Nora, have a pimento permanently housed in each nostril, or have hairy gums?
Oh, I'm so thankful that it is not an either or world we live in, and sometimes it's neither. I'm going to go with hairy gums, which is hard because I smile a lot, but I figure I can. You
can hide them. It'll leave toothpaste on there so it stays white.
Something. I don't know.
I won't ask you more, but I really enjoyed the time that we've got to spend here together. People want to find you after today. Where can they find you?
My website is hr-undercover.com. They can also find me on Twitter at Nora Burns.
What about LinkedIn? Are you there too?
I am on LinkedIn. I don't use it as much as I should, but I am on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Nora SPHR.
Well, I would highly recommend anybody listening to visit her website. It's pretty cool. It tells everything about what she does, and we will look to do a part dose 2. We'll do a on the second part to see the 15-month project. I want to hear about that. That sounds fascinating.
It was a little crazy, a little exhausting.
Fascinating.
A lot of fun. I learned a lot.
And you can find me at unconventionalleader.com. Highly suggest you go there, get a free ebook for signing up for my newsletter. Other than that, I want to thank everybody for listening to Leadership Happy Hour. Another great week. Another big cheers to Nora for being with us today. Thank you so much.
Woo! Cheers.
Cheers.
Have a great day.